Hi, I'm Lois Powell. And I'm Susan Schuler, and we're here to share tips, tricks, ideas, and resources to help you discover what's your story. Good morning, Lois. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back.
Good morning, Susan. It's great to be back, and I'm so excited to be talking about this next segment of the census.
Me too. This is Census Part 2. A couple of weeks ago, we did Census Part 1, and we anticipate there will be a Census Part 3 and 4. So exciting.
So today we're going to talk about 1850 to 1890. And that's an exciting period because that's when names were listed, when a lot more information was collected that you can find about your ancestors.
Should we get right into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start with the 1850 census. Lois, tell me what you know.
Well, in 1850, they started collecting not only names and names of children, but date of birth. Some indicated age, some might have indicated month or year of birth. They talked about place of birth. State or country of birth was what was listed, which was really great information to have. The date of a marriage, and was somebody married within the last year? Naturalization, there's a big one that just came through. So there is a lot of information that starts coming out in 1850 that becomes extremely valuable to have.
1850 is known as the first modern census, and that's exactly why that you can finally start to dig into that information.
It's interesting to note also in that time period, there were mortality schedules and there were slave schedules. And these are new additions to information we've had in the past.
Lois, can you tell us a little more, like define a mortality schedule?
The mortality schedules were done in 1850, 1860, 70, and 80. And really, it's very specific information talking about a deceased person for the 1 year period prior to the census. So, for example, it would have been from May 31st, 1849 through May 31, 1850 as example. So it's 1 year, and it's actually over, from a calendar point of view, over 1849, 1850. But it's also extremely important because what it will not only tell you, what you would find in the census about the fact perhaps that they died, but it will tell you about the disease or the cause of death and the number of days the person was ill. Really great information to have from a history point of view.
It sure is. I mean, that would help you narrow down a date if you were curious about when a person died, help you find maybe a death record if your state makes one, help you look for an obituary, really help you narrow down. I think it's a shame they didn't make them for every year that they did the census.
I think it is a big shame.
If you can find somebody in the mortality census, I think you should go play lotto. That's pretty lucky.
That's pretty lucky.
Yeah.
So that's a series of schedules you want to look into. There were also slave schedules during that same time period, at least for 1850 and 1860. If you remember in our prior series, it was really head counts is all you had information on. When you get to the slave schedule of 1850, unfortunately, they still don't have names. They talk about the city, town. They talk about the name of the slave owner, the number of slaves, the description of them, even if they're a fugitive from the state, and whether they're deaf, dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. So there was a great deal of information. I think you can go back in the slave schedule and learn a great deal at that point if you perhaps know the slave owner from earlier information that you've been collecting.
So they still don't list the name of the slave. It's only the slave owner that's listed.
It's only the slave owner, the number of slaves, that type of information.
Wow, so sad.
So sad, but it's useful information to be able to have.
Absolutely, and this is a place to find it.
And this is the place to find it. Mm-hmm. So shall we go on into some examples?
Why not?
All right, I have an example that I want to use.
Excellent.
I have some ancestors that I found back in 1850, John and Margaretha Iloff. And John was head of household in 1850. But in 1860, Margaretha was head of household and John was missing.
Uh-oh.
Now, I had assumed that John had passed. In fact, that's what family had said. But from a future census of 1870, I learned that there's a daughter born in 1861. Now, Margaretha is a pauper by that time. But the question is, did she have a child with someone else out of wedlock? Or there is a rumor that John was still alive, but perhaps was missing due to some legal issues. I haven't solved that mystery yet. I'm still looking to solve it. But those are some of the little tips that you can be sure you look for. Don't just stop at one census or the names. Go on and try to find little information about the children, for example, like in this case, that tells me that there's something else happening.
Sure. Now, she's not listed as a widow in the census, or in that census, they didn't list that yet.
Oh, no, she was listed as a widow a pauper.
Okay. So I wonder, have you ever heard the term grass widow?
No, I have not.
A grass widow is somebody who's a widow, but your husband is above the grass. Like, they just didn't want to say they were divorced.
And she could be a grass widow, but John has just disappeared. I have never found another record of him since the 1850 census, but he did have a lot of troubles. And there is a rumor that perhaps he died around 1857. We're still searching.
Okay. I guess we'll have to keep looking.
We'll keep looking, but those are some of the tidbits you start getting once you get into the 1850 census.
Excellent. I have a sample from the 1860 mortality schedule. We found my great-great-grandfather, Edward Clark. It lists him as 50, and he's married, and it lists his place of birth, which he just says Ireland. And then he died in the month of February. It lists his occupation as a crockery store owner, and he dies of inflammation of the lungs, and he was ill for 4 days. So while all that, I found that information important for me, and hopefully it will become important someday, I haven't been able really to find any other of these clues down the line. Like, there was no obituary. I haven't found a death record yet. I'm hoping that just keeping this on my radar, I will someday use it to find more information.
But it's also good to know the cause or the disease, because a lot of times you can start to trace history that you might not have records of.
Oh, absolutely.
And genetics start to come into play at that point. So good information to have. Yeah. Here's another example. In 1870, on my husband's side, Stephen Booth and his wife Charlotte. I found them in the 1870 census. And their, it was Stephen and his wife Lavinia and their children. And I found them in the 1870 census with two other people listed. One was a farm laborer, and one was a Charles Colburn, who was listed as 6 years old. And I didn't know who Charles Colburn was, but I hadn't found their children. So I started looking for their daughter, Charlotte, and found that Charlotte, once I had the name Colburn, was in fact married to a gentleman named Marcellus Colburn.
Oh.
When I went to the 1870 census for them, I found them in Chicago. They had also listed Charles. What I think might have happened, because this is a trick that you'll find in the census, is it is possible that Charles was staying with Stephen and Lavinia, his grandparents, when the census was taken. So if Stephen answered the door and was asked the question who lived in the household, he mentioned Charles. When in Chicago the census was taken, and Charlotte might have opened the door and was asked about the children, she named her son Charles, even though he wasn't physically present. So he is actually counted twice, but it is one child.
Yeah.
So there were several tips there. One is I got the last name and I found the daughter that I couldn't find. And two, I found that Charles was counted twice.
Excellent. And that's common.
That's very common.
Yeah.
You need to be aware of that.
If you can't find any persons on the census after 1860, maybe they died in the Civil War. Do you think that's a possibility with your ancestor?
Certainly a possibility.
Okay. They say that the 1870 census is really piecemeal for the South because so many people were omitted if you lived in the South.
That's a really good point. That
people were just scattered.
Census is done by humans. They go up to a door and they ask the questions.
Yeah. And
if people are moving around and scattered, there are people that are missed.
Yeah, but it certainly explains why people could not be found, or people were counted twice, or, somebody reporting the information might have given the information about somebody who passed away. There's lots of, you're right, it's human error. So take everything with a grain of salt.
And, when you say human error, we got to restate this, and I think we might have said it earlier, is human error also includes writing. You write things the way you hear them, but it also includes people telling the truth. There is a story, I don't know if you've heard this story before, about Mary Lincoln, who in one census was 28, and 10 years only later, when her husband was running for president, I think she was listed at 32. So, again, there's the human side of all of this.
Absolutely. And I don't think she's the only woman to lie about her age in the census or any other document for that matter.
Or anywhere.
That's for sure.
All right.
Let's move on to 1880.
All right. Well, 1880 became even more interesting because the censuses we talked about from 1850 to 1880 opened up all this information. But now in 1880, there was called the 1880 DDD Supplemental Census.
Wow.
And what is that? Well, it is the supplemental census for the defective, dependent, and delinquent classes.
Oh.
So it's quite different than you'll find in any other census. And in that information, it talks about the name of the person, the city or town. Is the person self-supporting or partly so? The age at which idiocy occurred, what they think is the cause of the idiocy. And this is a really strange one, but the size of the head. Is the head large, small, or natural? So in today's world, we would never have this. It asks about training school. Has the person ever been an inmate of a training school for idiots? It asked about the length of time they were there, if they were discharged. Were they also insane? Were they blind? Were they deaf? Were they epileptic? Are they paralyzed? Questions that obviously we couldn't ask today, but an awful lot of information in that census.
Sure. And also we wouldn't ask them today because we know the differences between, different diseases and insanity, things like that.
And there were very different definitions of
Right,
that.
absolutely.
So when you go back and research that, you can learn those definitions.
Yeah.
Now you can find out that really easy because in the federal census of 1880, they do ask the questions about health. And in there, in the regular census, it is asking about blind, deaf, or dumb, or idiotic. If you find the person located has checked that information, that's when you want to go look for the supplemental.
Okay. Did you find anyone in the supplemental?
Fortunately, I have not found anyone in the supplemental, at least of the family history I know so far. How about you?
I have not. I didn't know about the supplemental DDD until just now. So I would be curious to know if I could find someone in there, and then if they were in the facility for a legitimate purpose. Like, was it, they were insane, or was it postpartum depression or something to that effect? Things that they didn't have definitions for in 1880.
And by the way, that's an extremely important point when she talks about postpartum depression. A husband could put you in a sanatorium pretty much for any reason they wanted to.
Pretty scary stuff.
Which was pretty scary stuff.
Absolutely. One thing that's not very scary about the 1880 census is that this is the first census to identify relationship to the household. So if there's a woman in that list who's like 70 years old, it will finally say mother-in-law. And that's now the mother of the spouse of that person. And you could use that last name to see if that was your person's maiden name.
Again, more information.
Mm-hmm. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this also the same, this first census where they ask you for the value of your property?
Yes. I think it's the first one. It could be 1870. We probably should check that, folks.
Yeah.
But they do talk about real property, the value of it, and owned by each person, as well as they start collecting economic data. So you'll start getting information about agriculture and manufacturing, which, by the way, are other schedules.
Yeah, which I think we'll devote more time to in part 3 of our podcast, because there's a lot of other schedules: industry, economic, social science. One other thing I want to say about the 1880 census, when we were just talking about being truthful, I believe that when you had to estimate the value of your property, that was something else that people were not truthful about because they were afraid they were going to pay more taxes.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Move on to 1890.
I think we should. The sad tale of the 1890 census. I'm sure if you've been doing genealogy for any length of time, you know that the majority of the 1890 census died or burned in a fire in the Commerce Department in 1921, and less than 1% of that census survives. So if you have ancestors in parts of the District of Columbia, Perry County, Alabama, Muskogee, Georgia, McDonough County, Illinois, Wright County, Minnesota, parts of Hudson County, New Jersey, parts of Westchester and Suffolk County, New York, Gaston County, North Carolina, and Hamilton and Clinton counties in Ohio, Union County in South Dakota, and then a few pieces of few counties in Texas, Trinity, Rusk, Kaufman County, and Ovila County. You are very lucky because parts of those census, that's what exists. For the rest of us, we got nothing.
That's very limited information, but we are fortunate.
Yes, there is one bright spot in all of that doom and gloom.
And that is, there's something you can use to substitute for the federal census.
An important piece, too.
A very important piece. In fact, I think you have more information than I do because you found someone there.
I did. So what does survive from the 1890 census are the 1890 veteran schedules. So this would be anybody reporting that they were in the Civil War. That information has survived. And I have been able to find 3 of my second grade grandfathers who fought in the Civil War, listing their when they went in, when they went out, if they had any injuries, and where they were living now. So I think that's pretty good considering the rest of it burned to the ground.
Considering there's nothing else to be found.
Yes. But for me, that was a big clue because I couldn't find him in the 1890 census, obviously. And then to find that little nugget of information proved to me that he moved like 5 states from where he was living. So that was a big help to me.
Excellent.
And that's it for right now.
So stay tuned because there's more information coming. Oh, there is one little tidbit I forgot. In case you're like me, you accidentally fall into it. In 1850, the state IA, which all of us know is Iowa, well, in 1850, it was Indiana.
Oh, my goodness.
So there's just a little separate nugget for anybody. So stay tuned for the next series.
I think it's important to know that when you're going to use the census for research, you need to really educate yourself about the place you're researching. That's really important. Next time we're going to do part 3. We're going to talk about 1900 forward and all the different other schedules, the economic schedules, the social science schedules, and all of that. So stay tuned. Exciting stuff is coming. And we'll also talk about the release of the 1950 census, which will happen in 2022.
So keep on searching.